Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz on Capitol Hill. No indication that either of them has tested positive. At this point, we haven't heard any such thing. But beyond that, you consider the others. We know that there was the president from the University of Notre Dame who was also at that event. Jack Jenkins, his name. He was inside the Rose Garden during that event as well. He tested positive. He apologized to the students at his university for not wearing a mask at the time. To say nothing of all those who traveled aboard Air Force One this week with the president or with Hope Hicks on Tuesday to the debate, where many members of the Trump family and their guests did not wear masks. A doctor from the Cleveland Clinic even approached them before the debate started, reminding them that it had been mandated. It was required that everybody wear masks there, and that person was quickly turned away. So a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concern, frankly, to see whether anybody else may have been impacted by that. Among those we know that tested negative, Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, Dan Scavino, the social media director, and many others. But obviously, given the incubation period here, one negative test doesn't mean that you're out of the woods, Lester.
All right, Peter, thank you. Again, we're looking at Marine One on the south lawn of the White House, expecting President Trump to come out shortly to be flown to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda. That's where Kelly O'Donnell is right now. Kelly, what's the scene there?
Well, Lester, we're about 10 miles from the White House, and this will effectively be the president's home base for the next few days as a patient here, as we understand it. And the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center may be familiar to our audience. It has cared for presidents and notable members of the government for 80 years. And in the last decade or so, it combined the Navy facility, the Army facility, and it is now a joint base. So there are members of the military medical corps of all the branches who will be able to take care of the president. It is not your ordinary hospital, certainly. There is a presidential suite that is multiple rooms and offices made available for the president, and that is rarely used, of course. So the president will have his own space with not only a sleeping chamber, but office space for his team and staff, multiple bedrooms, kitchen facilities, things like that that will be separate, that will allow for the care of the president around the clock, and to still have the operation of government. And as our conversation has been outlining, the White House, as the president is still firmly in charge, this is a significant decision, of course, to leave the White House, which does have the White House Military Medical Office. And over these months of COVID, we have seen how many of the personnel from the military office have been those who have been providing the testing on a daily basis, caring for anyone who shows symptoms in the handful of cases that have happened inside the White House. They have been working long hours, and so now the president will be able to have access to all of the available treatments, as well as the president having the contacts he has with the pharmaceutical companies and so forth. I am told that he has not been in touch with the most famous infectious disease expert in the country, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has not been a part of the president's medical care. He is not a physician to the president. That's Dr. Sean Connolly, an osteopathic physician from the Navy, who is the chief White House physician. But Dr. Fauci, who has been in all of our living rooms over these many months, does not have a direct involvement in the president's care. We will expect to hear the choppers as the president arrives here by Marine One, and then we expect, as you would certainly anticipate as well, the tight security over the days when the president is here.
Right.
We're in Bethesda, Maryland, suburban Washington, and of course that's going to have an impact on people living in this immediate community. Certainly on the street, there are a lot of people that see cameras and personnel here, and so they know the president is coming.
Yeah, Kelly, let me just ask you this. The president has certainly been to that medical center before, either for examinations or to visit wounded soldiers. Would that normally be a trip taken in a motorcade? Is it unusual for him to fly to the hospital?
It is not unusual, and one of the main reasons for that is there is a helipad here at Walter Reed. It is a military facility, and that allows for no interference with local traffic. When a motorcade is moving in a city, there's always vulnerability to that motorcade. even just a normal fender bender type accident could be a national security risk. So when the weather is appropriate, the president flies to Walter Reed via Marine One and is able to motorcade if there is a weather call, as we refer to it, bad weather and that sort of thing. It's only about 10 miles, so it's a short distance, and we'll all be able to hear Marine One as it approaches and lands, but it will be on the ground here where we will not have direct access. It's my understanding there will be the presidential travel pool that is a part of our daily life and White House coverage, where there will be some coverage of that landing and then perhaps some opportunity to see the president as he enters the hospital. One could imagine that there would be the potential for the White House to make a statement here after he is admitted and after doctors check him in. It could be a very long night here at Walter Reed. Lester?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. We're told again it's a precaution to take the president to the military center, medical center. Justice correspondent Pete Williams has been looking into the laws governing what happens when and if a president is incapacitated. And again, we're not suggesting that's the case here, but it's something we have to talk about. Pete, walk us through it.
Right. I think people may find it somewhat reassuring to know that there are procedures here. And the first one is if the president knows that he may be incapacitated, like, for example, he's going to have scheduled surgery or there has to be anesthesia or something, then he signs a statement and transfers power temporarily to the vice president. This has happened 3 times before in our history under this relatively recent part of the Constitution, the 25th Amendment, and each time involving this very facility where presidents have been for surgery. The most recent times, President George W. Bush did it twice for colonoscopies in 2002 and 2007. So that's when the president knows there may be some reason to transfer power. And that has, as I say, been used before. There is another part of the amendment that has not been used before, that if the president is unable to say that he can't carry out the duties of his office, then the vice president can consult with members of the cabinet. And if they agree that the president is incapacitated, then the vice president takes over until such time as the president is able to resume his duties. As you say, Lester, all very theoretical at this point, but at least it's good to know that there is a procedure under this relatively recent part of the Constitution, the 25th Amendment.
All right, Pete, thanks very much. A lot of contact tracing going on right now, those who may have been near the president, certainly over the last several days. And among those, former Vice President Biden, who, of course, shared the debate stage on Tuesday with the president. Casey Hunt, what can you tell us about what we're hearing from the Biden camp?
Lester, that's right. First of all, we know that both the former vice president and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, took coronavirus tests today, and those came back negative. That was also true for his vice presidential running mate, Kamala Harris, and her husband. She was not at the debate. So Joe Biden continued his campaign schedule today, appearing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he expressed sympathy for President Trump and hopes for his recovery, and also focused on his economic message. And he, of course, has campaigned on the issues surrounding the virus, criticizing President Trump's handling of the virus. But the focus today very much on the president's health and on the economy. But, of course, this is an incredibly difficult period of time for everyone close to the Biden campaign and anyone as well on Capitol Hill who was at perhaps the event on Saturday last weekend when Amy Coney Barrett was named to the Supreme Court to, of course, the debate on Tuesday night. The Trump family was seated in the audience while ostensibly wearing a mask was required, and Biden's guests all wore masks and were socially distanced in the hall. NBC reported that a Cleveland Clinic staffer actually approached the Trump family, tried to offer them masks, and they were declined. And they watched from the audience without masks on. And you saw Melania Trump walk up to the stage without a mask on at the end of the debate. Dr. Jill Biden, when she went up to embrace her husband, was in fact wearing a mask. So quite a lot of nervousness sort of throughout the halls of the Capitol. Questions about whether the legislative branch of government should be tested more aggressively. We obviously are witnessing some questions about the continuity of power in our government. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked about that this morning and acknowledged that those questions are ongoing all the time. Contingency planning is always there for it, but it's rarely needed in the way that it perhaps certainly is being discussed and focused on today, considering the concern about the president's health. So this also potentially affects the confirmation process for Amy Coney Barrett, who is, of course, the president's pick to be on the Supreme Court. Those hearings scheduled to start October 12th. We've learned that Mike Lee, a senator who is on the Judiciary Committee, Republican, who attended that ceremony in the Rose Garden on Saturday, has tested positive for coronavirus. And Democrats are calling for that Supreme Court confirmation hearing to be postponed so that members can quarantine if necessary. But, of course, Republicans, including Mitch McConnell in Kentucky today, where he was campaigning for his own Senate seat, saying that they're going to push ahead with those confirmation hearings. So this obviously impacting dramatically, potentially, the presidential campaign with the former Vice President Joe Biden, and also rippling across the other branches of government down the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue from where we're all looking right now. Lester.
Yeah, Casey, thank you. And of course, the focus right now on waiting to see the president exit the White House and board Marine One for that short flight to Bethesda for precautionary treatment, as we had noted from his the White House physician. The president was being treated with a cocktail, an antibody cocktail. He was also apparently looking at the note. It says the president's been taking zinc, vitamin D, famotidine, melatonin, and daily aspirin. I don't know if all or at least some of those are related to his current illness, or if they're part of his daily protocol. That note goes on to say, as of this afternoon, the president remains fatigued, but in good spirits, being evaluated by a team of experts, and they have decided, as a precaution, they want to take him to a full-fledged hospital where he can work and be treated. We all know from our months of becoming pseudo-experts on coronavirus that it sometimes comes in phases. We've heard many stories of people who the first days go okay, and then things can take a very sudden turn. While we wait to see the president, I want to turn to NBC News presidential historian Michael BESCHLOSS. Michael, a lot of our focus these last several weeks has been on democracy, the Constitution being challenged on many levels. But hearing from Pete, it sounds reassuring that the continuity of government is in place and that process is ready should we need it.
That's absolutely right. And Pete was so good in what he said about the use of the 25th Amendment. If there's been any problem with it, it's that it has not been used enough, because some presidents have shied away from giving power to a vice president because they think it shows weakness. And that is especially true during a presidential re-election campaign. Lester, we have never seen anything like the scene that we were about to see, a president being taken from the White House to a hospital 1 month before a presidential effort to be reelected. Closest thing that ever happened to this was 1956. Dwight Eisenhower was running for reelection, had an attack of ileitis, intestinal problems. He had to go to what was then Walter Reed Army Hospital in a different location to get intestinal surgery. And the way that he dealt with this was to say, it's incumbent on me to show the country and the voters that I'm as equipped as possible and I'm in good shape to serve another 4 years. And the result was that his doctors were told to tell the press everything it wanted to know. There were charts. They even documented the president's bowel movements, if you can believe it. But that was what set the trend for modern times, when presidents are pressed to be much more open when they have a life-threatening illness. And I think if you look through history, the presidents who have made mistakes have been those who have tried to be secretive about their treatment and about the details of their suffering. The ones who've done the best for history and for the country have been those who essentially said, I'm president, I'm public property, you Americans are entitled to know everything you should.
Michael BESCHLOSS, always appreciate your perspective. We want to go to Hallie Jackson again at the White House. Hallie, kind of walk us through, where we have journeyed since late last night here in the East Coast to this point where the president is about to be choppered to the hospital.
Boy, Lester, what a journey it has been. You could even say late yesterday when word first broke of that top 8, Hope Hicks, testing positive for the coronavirus. That is what set some of these pieces in play, although we should note it is not clear how the president contracted the coronavirus. It is not clear how long he may have been contagious or not before this positive test today. So let's talk about the timeline here. You can go back to Saturday as we keep an eye, and I'm watching, so I'm looking at the screen here to see if the president walks out, because we do expect that any minute. Saturday night at the Rose Garden, the president held an event that's been referenced here, revealing his Supreme Court nominee. 2 people there at least tested positive for the coronavirus. Monday and Sunday, the president had a couple of events, but Tuesday is a critical day because that is when he traveled to the debate in Cleveland. Lester, you and I were on the air with the rest of our team talking about that debate. President Trump maskless on stage with Joe Biden, socially distanced, and the moderator as well, but family members in the audience, family members of the president, unmasked in the audience despite requirements that happen, essentially. The debate occurred. The president was on Air Force One with this entourage of friends and family and advisors, including Hicks. That happened Tuesday. Wednesday morning, we understand, Hicks tested negative. The president went to a rally in Minnesota that evening. Often at these rallies, the president is not wearing a mask. Many in the crowd are not wearing masks. There is virtually no social distancing as well. Wednesday night, we understand, and I'm told by sources familiar with Hicks' condition, she started to feel sick and she quarantined on Air Force One as the plane flew from Minnesota back here to Washington. That positive test came up on Thursday, and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told reporters here at the White House today the White House was aware of that positive test as the president was departing for a New Jersey fundraiser, as he was lifting off, actually, Marine One 24 hours ago yesterday. That is when they learned of Hicks' positive test. Now, the president still got on Air Force One and traveled to that fundraiser in Bedminster, New Jersey, returned home, took a test, went on Fox News, Lester, and revealed to the world, to the country, that he had taken a test and that he may quarantine until those test results came out. And then, of course, it was just before 1 o'clock this morning. That's sort of where the journey has taken us, that the president revealed that positive diagnosis. I think it's important. The president is often on Twitter. That is one of the ways that we hear from the president the most. He has not tweeted other than that tweet so far today. And his appearance here on the White House Up On will be the first time that we have seen him since word of this test came down. I think a lot of viewers might want to know, what does this mean? What do mild symptoms mean for President Trump? In this instance, based on our reporting and the sources that we've talked to, those mild symptoms include a low-grade fever. That's according to sources. And the White House physician has acknowledged that the president is fighting fatigue as well. He is feeling fatigued. But overall, White House officials do say he is in good spirits. It seems as though the First Lady Melania Trump has symptoms that are perhaps less intense. The doctor saying that she has a mild cough and a headache as far as the First Lady. And again, when we see the president, this will be the first time that, frankly, the world will be able to get a glimpse of how he's doing. I'm told by a senior administration official that he will, walk under his own power to Marine One there, Lester. So it'll be an opportunity to see him. This morning, as the news was first breaking, Lester, as I think the country was waking up to this news, if you hadn't been up all night following it, the markets started to crash, started to tank a bit out of fear and concern about what this positive test meant for President Trump. This touches every facet of government, as you've been talking about. National security, domestic policy, and the campaign on hold, with the president's team doing virtual events or postponing events altogether, Lester.
And we continue to watch that door at the White House, waiting for the president to emerge. Hallie, thank you. Chuck Todd is with us as well. Chuck, let's kind of break down things. As recently as last night, the president talking about coronavirus, that COVID will be gone soon. He has downplayed it. Yeah. He mocked Vice President Biden during the debate the other night. Vice President Biden today being gracious and offering his prayers and thoughts with the first couple, but then going into his stump speech on coronavirus. We thought Supreme Court might occupy a lot of our attention, or something else leading up to the election. Does this guarantee now that coronavirus, that COVID, will be the issue, the story going down the stretch?
Lester, here's the thing. Every time anybody in their life tries to plan around this virus, whether it's for personal moments in your family, think weddings, confirmations, bar mitzvahs, or you're trying to plan a campaign, or you're trying to focus, the virus always seems to win. And I think that this is yet another reminder that no matter how much you think you can work around the virus, you can focus on other issues, the virus always, unfortunately, seems to stalk us. I mean, I'm still haunted by something that one of the leaders at the WHO said to me in Meet the Press 6 months ago, and he said, this virus is going to stalk us whether we like it or not for months around this globe. And that's the way I almost feel watching it unfold in this campaign today. I mean, there's no doubt that this is politically uncomfortable for the Trump campaign, but certainly it's uncomfortable talking politics right now. The president's health is at risk. We know that he is somebody who is in the demographic that is more at risk for a tougher bout with this virus. And so I think that certainly is casting a bit of a pall over this campaign. But look, I think in some ways this campaign is on pause for about 10 days, if you will, 7 to 10 days at a minimum. And during that pause, what else are we going to be talking about but the president's battle with this virus, which then guarantees that the virus is front and center in all of our minds.
And we did see, again, Biden campaigning at an event in Michigan today. Are you suggesting we may see him pull back from the road in the days ahead?
Look, I think that it would be prudent. I mean, you know, let's be frank here. You could see everybody has felt we all have fatigue. We're all feeling a little cooped up, and I think there's been this. Well, maybe you can have a campaign, and maybe you can have fans, and maybe you can have people here. And you can't help but wonder, is everybody going to sort of take a second look here, right? The Trump campaign, the Biden campaign, us in the media, and going, okay, you know, the minute you slip a little bit, the minute you get a little lackadaisical, you don't bring your mask here, or maybe you're traveling a bit more, you know, you're just raising the risk of getting this virus. So I wonder if, just as the Biden campaign's been thinking about expanding more and doing more in-person stuff, I wonder if they start to pull back. And on the Trump campaign, I was surprised today to hear the campaign say that Vice President Pence's schedule would continue as is. I think there needs to be a serious conversation to be had about whether the vice president should be traveling too much while the president's condition is unknown, when we're talking about continuity of government. So I do think that there is some question I have about whether the vice president should be going to Utah for a debate, and instead, if they're going to have the debate, and I think there's nothing wrong with having it, should that debate be remote? I mean, should you mitigate, right? Are we doing enough to do it, and do all the campaigns ramp up their mitigation efforts? Doing a virtual debate or doing it remotely would certainly be one of the things that could be early fallout from what we've seen today.
Yeah, and frankly, a lot of these conversations taking place in a vacuum because there's a lot we simply don't know right now. Again, mild symptoms, we don't really necessarily know what that means. We're about to watch the president taken to a hospital aboard a helicopter. We're trying to read the tea leaves in that. Senior Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell is with us again and following this. And on that note, Andrea, the press availabilities we've had on this have been rather brief and narrow focused. At some point, there's going to be a growing demand for more answers. Do you think that moment is already here?
Yeah, I think it's here and it's past. I think that in past White Houses, you would have had the president's physician or other physicians involved in his case coming into the briefing room and briefing Hallie and Peter and the White House correspondents, telling them what is exactly going on there. Because people need to know, people want to know, and this is the President of the United States. Everything about his health is of national significance. And it is rather surprising, and they have been very, very tight-lipped about his overall health, even with his annual physical after a bump in the road with his first doctor, Dr. Ronnie Jackson, and that kind of went off the rails. And so they've not released a whole lot of information and not had very many public briefings. And in this case, certainly since that announcement at 1 o'clock this morning, this should have been briefed. It's also could be a sign, but we can also I'll certainly say is that there is real disagreement inside the White House task force and a lot of conflict. There's Dr. Scott Atlas, who's a radiologist who comes from Stanford, very highly regarded, but is not at all a virologist or a public health expert, and has been disagreeing, importantly disagreeing with Dr. Fauci, Dr. Redfield, all of the people at CDC and FDA. You've also had pressure from the White House task force on the CDC and the FDA to roll back what they thought was best practices in some big cases and big instances. So there's a lot of undermining the confidence that the public by now has, confidence in the rollout of the vaccine, where they've done a very good job of ramping up and spending a lot of money on best bets of what will be successful, pre-positioning even these vaccines, but they have not done a very good job on making it clear to the people that the FDA will be making the decisions at an independent scientific panel, and it will not be rushed out for political reasons. And that you have to tag with the president and some of these advisors. Dr. Atlas first came to his attention, we understand, from his appearances on Fox News. And that's not the way to choose an expert on a novel virus, something as unpredictable and unknown, really, as this virus, and that is why you were seeing Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci and others really not having any public appearances and being squeezed out. And also, of course, the earlier episodes with hydroxychloroquine, which the president said he was taking, which has been withdrawn from emergency use by the FDA after that emergency use was rushed through, some would say inappropriately, and after the risks turned out to be greater than the benefits, the FDA took it back, with the president, Peter Navarro, still pushing at the trade advisor, who has been very vocal and outspoken against Dr. Fauci and the other medical experts. Right. Lester?
All right, Andrea Mitchell, thank you very much. If you're just joining us, you're looking at Marine One on the South Lawn of the White House. Any time now, we expect to see President Trump make his way. We believe he will walk to the chopper and be taken to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in nearby Bethesda, Maryland, for what we're told is precautionary treatment. As we have been reporting, he was diagnosed overnight with COVID-19, both he and the First Lady. The White House describing both as suffering mild symptoms. Nonetheless, the president going to be taken to the hospital where he will have work facilities, we're told, and that they will be able to treat him perhaps more effectively during the progress of his disease. Dr. Lippy Roy is an internal medicine physician and an NBC News medical contributor. She joins us now. Doctor, thank you for being with us. We don't have a lot to work off of. We have the statement from the White House physician about this antibody cocktail that was given to the president. But beyond that, we don't know a lot. Can you kind of read in, give us your read on what appears to be happening?
Yeah, Lester, I think it's a wise decision to have the president transferred to an inpatient setting. It's important for viewers to remember that while the vast majority of people who are infected with COVID-19 do recover, remember the vast majority of people who go on to develop severe illness from COVID-19 also are people who are over the age of 65 and who have chronic illness. And President Trump falls into both categories. He's over 70 years old, and he has obesity and possibly other chronic medical conditions, which we may not know of. To Andrea Mitchell's point, the White House has not really been very forthcoming or transparent with the president's full medical history. So, while certainly physicians and all of us hope that the president's clinical status remains stable, you just don't know. And it's important to watch him closely in a hospital such as Walter Reed, where he can be monitored by specialists and specialized equipment, including a ventilator, should the president's respiratory status deteriorate. So I think this is a wise decision to watch him closely, Lester.
Yeah, and so much of the reporting we've done on COVID with people who have suffered it is that it seems to run in different phases. There's a phase one where you don't necessarily feel great, but you're okay, and then things move very quickly. Is that generally the way it goes?
That's a great question. I wish we had ways to predict who's going to get sick, how long that sickness is going to last, who's going to recover. Again, we have general ideas in terms of severe illness and mortality, which is by far mostly amongst people who are aged over 65. Again, the short answer, Lester, is that we don't know how the president's clinical course is going to go. And I think for those reasons, they're transferring him to an inpatient, in-hospital setting where he'll be watched very closely, Lester.
Dr. Roy, thank you for your expertise. I want to bring in White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, Chuck and I talked about it a little bit, but, you know, we're 32 days from an election. We've got a couple of debates, including the VP debate coming next week. What do we know about, you know, how life goes on the campaign trail?
Well, there's no doubt that this will have some real-world implications about the mechanics of how this campaign moves forward. According to the Debate Commission, they are expecting the vice presidential debate to move forward, but the other two debates certainly in question. We know that this is also going to have an impact when it comes to the actual campaigning itself. Our Mike Memoli reporting just moments ago that former Vice President Joe Biden will be taking down its negative advertising from its rotation. We did hear from the former vice president earlier today, who was in Michigan, who started his comments by talking about the president, saying that his thoughts and prayers are with the president, with the first family right now. And we know that President Trump clearly cannot be out on the campaign trail. So his campaign saying all other campaign events will be considered on a case-by-case basis, and we will make any relevant announcement in the days ahead. You can expect, if and when campaigning does resume by the president, for that to be virtual in the near term. We understand that Vice President Mike Pence does plan to move forward with some campaign events. Now, for his part, the vice president currently at his residence at the Naval Observatory as he continues to monitor all of this. But there is no doubt, Lester, that this is going to have a significant impact on the mechanics of the campaign, and Vice President Biden making it very clear that this is just not a day for politics, Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker, thanks. Let's go to Casey Hunt right now, who has more on all this. Casey?
Lester, to pick up on what Kristen was saying there, and also what Chuck was talking about just a couple of minutes ago, this move really underscores the seriousness with which the Biden campaign is taking this and reading this decision to take the president to the hospital, although we are also told that this was something that has been under consideration in the works since we learned that the president had contracted the virus before we necessarily understood that it was perhaps serious enough for them to consider making this move. Lester, we can also report, and we have been talking to as we think through the continuity of government questions, whether congressional leaders were informed about what the president was planning to do here, because it does raise questions. Obviously, we're focused on Vice President Mike Pence, but we also potentially want to know where House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and then the President pro tem of the Senate, Chuck Grassley, are as we're thinking through all of this. And we can report, a Democratic aide tells me that the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was not informed that the president was going to be going to Walter Reed to work from there for a few days before it became public knowledge. And they also have not, according to this aide, had any additional conversations about continuity of government planning with the House Speaker's office. It really underscores in the conversations that I've been having the degree of uncertainty around this. And to pick up on what Andrea Mitchell was saying, the unusual way in which the administration is handling this. I mean, that clearly is not anything, you know, for those of us who have covered the Trump administration for all of these years, they do many, many things in ways that are not what we would consider usual or normal. But in a high-stakes situation like this one, where so much is potentially on the line, the President of the United States affected, obviously every family who has someone, a loved one with COVID, has obviously experienced the anxiety on a human level, but his governmental position obviously makes this just so much different. And the way that they are handling this, it is hard to underscore the degree to which that uncertainty has rattled people people on Capitol Hill in both parties. The level of concern about what's going on and the lack of information coming from the White House is not something that certainly we as reporters would expect in a situation of this magnitude and gravity, but it's also not something that many members of Congress would expect either in a situation like this. And that, I think, is crossing across both the Congress and also the Biden campaign as well. Because don't forget, oftentimes, especially in a campaign, in a phase of the campaign, as close as we are to Election Day, while candidates may be running against each other, that doesn't mean that they don't talk to each other under normal circumstances. And in an event like this, you may have seen at least, at the very least, perfunctory communication. We haven't seen any of that, Lester.
All right. Casey Hunt, thank you. As you were speaking, we saw the Marine Honor Guard take position near the entrance of the chopper, the Marine who you normally see salute the president as he walks aboard the chopper. So that would seem to suggest perhaps that we'll see the president fairly soon as he makes his way to the chopper and then that short flight to Bethesda, Maryland, to the medical center there. Standing by for us, White House correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, you're on the opposite side of the White House in this picture we're looking at, but can you just tell us what it has been like there today as all of this has unfolded?
This has been a dramatic day, to say the very least, Lester. Over the course of the evening, as this information was trickling out and as reporters like myself were trying to get more details, there was a lot of silence from White House officials as they tried to come to terms with exactly what the situation was involving the president and, frankly, involving themselves. Many of those individuals, including some of them who were flying with the president to his Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey yesterday, we saw walking into the White House today, one of the president's aides walking in without a mask when he came here to be tested. But again, just to give you a sense, having been upstairs inside the West Wing, what they describe as the upper press area, the area where folks like myself are allowed to go. I had an opportunity to visit with Kayleigh McEnany and some of the other, she's the press secretary, some of the president's other top aides. And many of these individuals that frankly I've never seen wearing a mask today were wearing a mask inside. When they came to the cameras, though, notably, Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, did not. He said that he was more than 6 feet away from reporters and chose not to, but it was a message that a lot of people were curious about today. About this picture that we're looking at right now, again, as you look at Marine One there, and perhaps we can take that shot in full, just beneath the nose, actually. If you see those two legs, that is the Marine who is standing at attention waiting for the president to arrive. Given this angle, and our camera is now below the White House, about a football field away, so that we can provide you this live picture. From this angle, we will not see the president physically exiting the White House, the south portico, as they describe it, of the residence to go to Marine One. But the pool of reporters, including a camera team, is there right now, and we are told by White House officials that the president will make himself available, as it were, will be seen by cameras. This an effort to try to reassure Americans that he is okay right now. Over the course of this day, in my conversations with White House officials, they told me there were discussions about whether the president would make any public statement in some form from within the residence or wherever else. Obviously, he wouldn't be able to come to the cameras given the isolation he's now in as a function of his testing positive. But they thought that might be a critical moment as well. Notably, we have not heard from the president in any form, not on Twitter, not in any other way, since last evening when he announced his diagnosis, I guess early this morning, frankly, just before 1 o'clock in the morning. So again, to be clear, we will see the president. White House officials say there is not any transfer of power taking place to Vice President Mike Pence, who remains at the Naval Observatory, his residence only a matter of miles away from here. The White House saying that the president remains in charge. Lester?
Peter Alexander at the White House again as we await to see the president make his way to the helicopter. Let's turn to historian and NBC News contributor John Meacham. John, you have seen a lot and chronicled a lot. Have you ever seen these circumstances come together 32 days before an election?
Never. And what we're watching now is the pageantry of state intersecting with a pandemic that has touched so many millions of lives around the world and has now touched the domestic life and the both the personal life of the president's inner circle and the highest levels of government, which is tragic in its way. But because he is the president the personal is political. And I think that, when we think about how White Houses have in hours of crisis about the health of the president, how they have communicated, it is a very mixed record, tending to the obscure and tending to the misleading in our past. And I think that there's a wonderful opportunity here, if the White House desired to take it, to be open, to explain what's unfolding more precisely, in more detail. One of the lessons of good democratic lowercase d practice is that more information is often not only healthy for the life of the nation, but has political benefits. And I remember, as you do, that March day in 1981 when President Reagan was shot. The stories that came out were of this remarkably resilient and brave American president who was joking with the doctors, saying to his wife, "Honey, I forgot to duck." That kind of anecdotage reassured a country that was only, at that point, 11 or 12 years removed from a period of enormous political violence and enormous instability. This is a different moment. It's a different hour in the life of the nation. And one of the things that I think the president could do with this moment as he faces his own struggle with this virus is show the country how serious the pandemic is, show how seriously he is taking it, and show empathy for not only his own situation and that of his colleagues at the highest levels, but those around the country and around the world. And there are essential questions about the continuity of governance. I think that one of the things we all have to do, and I think everyone I've been listening to and you've been talking to have been this way, is we should be calm, we should be sober, we should be driven by fact and data. But we need fact and data in order to be driven by fact and data. And so it's a remarkable moment, particularly, as Casey was saying, given the proximity of the presidential election. I think Vice President Biden performed with dignity and with grace today. And the country hopes for the best for the president. The country hopes for the best for, ideally, for every American family. And one potential political impact, and again, this is not trying to game out something serious, it's just simply the case that the American president occupies a unique position in the life of the nation and the psychology of the nation. It is, I think, these images, this story that we've been consumed with today, may be having the effect of making a large segment of the American population that has been skeptical of expertise and has been somewhat cavalier to the point of endangering others. It might make that segment of the population pause and realize that perhaps fact and science should be driving our decision making as all of us struggle, as President Trump is now struggling, to get this pandemic under control and return to some sense of an ordinary national life.
John Meacham, always a pleasure to have you aboard. Again, looking at the south lawn of the White House, Marine One, waiting to see the president as he makes his way aboard the chopper, where he'll be heading to the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Bethesda. That's where Kelly O'Donnell is standing by right now. Kelly, what can you tell us from there?
Well, in the time that we've been talking, Lester, there are certainly passersby who recognize that the president is now coming here. We've had people honking their horns. There are cameras assembled and so forth. And they're expecting that the president will be here. And for the next few days, however long the president is a patient here, this will be one of the most fortified places anywhere in the world. Certainly the residence at the White House is heavily fortified. This is a military installation that combines multiple branches, not only Army, but Navy and Air Force as well. So it's a joint military facility that gives great security, and it also gives the president access to a suite of rooms that will function in effect as both the residence and the West Wing of the White House for however long the president is here. And by that I mean, if we picture a normal hospital room, even a private room, You can imagine the kinds of equipment and facilities there. This, in the special facility here for only the president, so it is seldom used, has sleeping quarters, places for work and staff, dining, and of course medical treatment. That's very different than any ordinary patient, and of course the president is certainly not an ordinary patient. One other benefit coming to the hospital, in addition to the medical care the president will get, you have with the president and First Lady 2 people with active coronavirus in the White House, and there is a civilian staff that works at the White House. They work for the executive residence, as it's known. They're butlers and kitchen personnel, in addition to the security and law enforcement staff. All of those people would be potentially exposed to the virus, simply caring for the president in the time that he would be in the White House with active virus. And so being here at a medical facility where everyone around the president will have the proper gear, will have the medical training, will be effectively safer, is also a way to protect the complex at the White House and the many employees there, both civilian and law enforcement and political staff, from exposure of being in a place where there is active coronavirus. So that is also a benefit for the president, separate from just his own medical care, but handling this in what will be an enormous task for the White House over the next several days, to handle the political messaging of trying to project calm, trying to provide information. You've discussed the history of White Houses not always being so forthcoming, and here we've got a medical facility that is military, and of course the commander-in-chief will be the patient. So we would expect that there would be some effort to provide briefings and things in the days to come, but that would likely still go through the White House, and so we'll have to see how forthcoming they are with additional information. By also being here now at the early onset of the president's illness, it separates what we saw in England with Boris Johnson, who had to be transferred on, if I remember correctly, a stretcher to go from 10 Downing Street to a medical facility when he was in real distress. That is an image that no political leader wants to have available. So the president being able to walk in his own power, get to the helicopter, something that is a tradition, it's sort of the system of power, and it is one of those things that conveys that the president is at least okay at this point, even as he's dealing with this illness. And it will come here. Now, there is a landing facility here at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And different than what we saw, I was at the White House back in November of 2019 when the president made what we all perceived to be a very hurried trip here to the White House. They did not have Marine One that day, and they had to go by motorcade. Today, we expect the president will fly here.
Kelly, Kelly, let me break away from you. I can't see it, but I'm told the president has left the residence, is making his way to the chopper. I saw from our angle the Marine there snap to attention. We may see. Apparently, he's waving. I'm getting a kind of a play-by-play in my ear. He's waving to the media. You see one of the photographers there now back off, and there through the window. If you look through the window of the rectangular window, you might have gotten a glimpse there of the president, but who made his way on his own power. And I'm assuming we will get the videotape turnaround of those pictures from the other side of the helicopter. But the president, we believe, has just boarded Air Force One. He's got some staff with him. We don't know if the First Lady is traveling with him, but it'll be a very, very short flight over to Bethesda and the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where he will be offered precautions now as he deals with this diagnosis of COVID-19. Apparently feeling mild symptoms, and he's been treated at the White House itself, but doctors thought it was advisable to transfer him to the hospital. Hallie Jackson also watching along with us. Hallie, we see many a time, of course, the president stop at the rope line. You guys fire questions at him. Would he have had to pass that rope line to get where he is?
If he had walked out the way he typically does, then yes, Lester. And as has been talked about, we're looking at a bit of a reverse angle than we're used to seeing. You are right in that we are expecting to see what we call in our TV parlance the tape playback. So we should be able to see that shot of President Trump boarding Marine One. I'm told by our pool reporter colleagues, the small team of reporters who represent the rest of the pool, that he walked out in a mask and suit, walked to the chopper to Marine One, followed by White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. No sign of First Lady Melania Trump, so perhaps an indication that she is remaining back, isolating at the residence there. Lester, this is unusual in so many ways, but let me tell you one way that it is very unusual, and that is that the president was in a mask. That is not something that we have seen from him often. It is, in fact, extremely rare. As I can hear now on the North Lawn, the rotors start to pick up speed. It looks as though Marine One will lift off any second. When that happens, those reporters are able to sort of run that tape physically back into the White House, and then we'll be able to see that video, Lester. But clearly, the White House, by placing these cameras and putting reporters out here to see the president, wanted to show him up and walking around and getting on Marine One and sort of have an appearance by the president to hopefully, in their view, put people's minds at ease about his condition. They have been talking about what they say are mild symptoms from President Trump, as we can hear. Hopefully you can't hear it on my microphone, but the Marine One rotor getting louder and louder here.
Yeah, we can. We in fact can see it, Hallie, from our camera angle here. The helicopter rotor is now spinning and should be lifting off shortly. You noted he had a mask. Yeah. Most hospitals, of course, will require you to wear a mask, certainly during this time of COVID. The president will be treated, obviously, by medical staff who will be wearing, I'm sure, full protective gear, as we've seen in so many hospitals over the last 7-8 months here during this pandemic. But the president about to depart the White House. What a day of dramatic developments. Again, that test overnight confirming that he and the First Lady had both tested positive for COVID-19. The president said to have been lethargic on the flight coming back to the White House. And there is Marine One now lifting off from the White House grounds. The setting sun glinting off the side of Marine One as he pivots away from the White House for the short flight to Bethesda and the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Incredible sight to see, and again, incredible series of developments that have brought us to this point. A president who has admittedly, well, here, I'm sorry, this is the tape now. It's been sped up. All right, you can see, so that video was sped up, but that's a very quick turnaround of the video. We saw the president getting on Marine One, clearly walking on his own, and we'll try to get that in normal time, normal cadence, so you can see how that played out. But there is the chopper making its way. But as again noted, incredible series of events. A president who has often played down the threat of coronavirus. As recently as yesterday was saying the pandemic is almost over, and now he has become the biggest symbol in the world of those who have suffered, who have contracted this virus, which shows no signs of slowing down. More than 24 hotspot states in this country now seeing an increase in cases. But certainly COVID has a different and a new face tonight in that of the President of the United States. Let's go to Peter Alexander. Peter is at the White House. You had a look at those pictures as well. That was the standard way the President would normally board the chopper.
Yeah, Lester, you're right. And as we look at the helicopter now flying to Walter Reed Medical Center, you're looking at the most prominent patient in the planet, President Trump, now among millions of people across the globe who have suffered from this this awful infection of coronavirus, COVID-19. Just moments ago, as you noted, we did see, and we will play it for you in real time just moments from now, the president departing the residence. Notably, he was dressed in a suit, as he traditionally is. You almost never see him in casual attire, except perhaps on a weekend excursion to play golf, always dressed in a full suit with a tie. Clearly, the intention by this White House is to show that this president remains at work. As we've discussed, he was wearing a mask. He was trailed only a short distance behind by his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who was also wearing a mask here today. And so for the next several days, the president will now convalesce at Walter Reed Medical Center, where White House officials insist he will continue to do his work, communicating with top lawmakers over the course of the day, including the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell today. McConnell saying that their conversation focused on, among other things, their desire to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Again, the intention to communicate to the American people that this president remains on the job. White House officials telling us only a short time ago that President Trump is in charge. Here now, Lester, you can see on the right side of your screen the picture just moments ago, the president with a thumbs up, a wave, walking slowly from the residence, the South Portico, really a matter of 40 or 50 yards to Marine One.
And Melania Trump apparently not on that trip, at least not via the helicopter. You can see some staff there, Secret Service, the Marines there to greet the president as he boards a helicopter. Offering a triple tap there, as you saw on the railing as he stepped aboard the helicopter to take his seat. And on the left side of your screen, that's the live picture. We don't think the helicopter will be out of our view much because it's only about a 10-mile flight from the White House to Bethesda. As we noted, there is a military landing helipad for the chopper there, so he'll be able to. We whisked right inside the hospital. I'm not sure whether we will see him. We'll find out here very shortly. And again, this is the tape of just a few minutes ago as the chopper was prepared for the flight, sealed up. Chuck Todd, our Washington bureau chief, is joining us, or moderator, Meet the Press. Forgive me, Chuck Todd is with us. All right. Chuck, your reflections on what we're seeing and how swiftly things have progressed.
Well, look, I think it's very important that we saw the president there today. It's the first time we've seen him all day, and walking under his own power, looking relatively like he looks anytime, except with one unusual difference is that he was wearing a mask. But I do think that's an important point of reassurance for the country, reassurance for anybody watching overseas, and I think that's this is the concerns that we should be having right now: continuity of government, the president's health, making sure that we're getting all of the truth that we can out of the White House. I will say this. Him being upright, walking under his own power, climbing up the stairs, that does seem to at least comport with the White House talking point of saying that he's just going there out of an abundance of caution. So, that's why these appearances do matter, is that, it's one thing for the White House to tell us, no, this is doing an abundance of precaution, but to see him let people make up their own mind and to see what they're seeing today. But look, this is clearly, this is real life, and this pandemic impacting our continuity of government and this campaign, and it's something that we have all known was going to be inevitable, that no matter how much you try to put this virus in the rearview mirror, this virus forces its way right in front of our face, and like it is today.
Marine One on final approach to the landing pad at the National Medical Center in Bethesda. You saw the twin of this helicopter also escorting the president as he sets down. Kelly O'Donnell is there watching all this. Kelly?
Yes, Lester, just watching this as we go, there's always more than one Marine One that lands. There is one just in our vision right here. That strikes me as being highly exposed, so I don't know if that's the one the president is on or if there is a separate Marine One helicopter that is that just seems very exposed to me. So it may be elsewhere on the campus. What I can tell you is that colleagues of ours who have been pre-positioned inside this military installation earlier today are in a position to get pictures of Marine One landing, the president getting off the chopper, and then presumably going into the hospital. So we will have those images as well. Here on the street, traffic certainly stopped. There's been a greater police presence here as people have been watching this unfold. A lot of pedestrians have come here. Most of them, if not all, are wearing masks. There's very high mask wearing here. We're, of course, next to a hospital community. Some of these people may be employees who are getting off from their day. Some people with their kids and their dogs here to see Marine One and the president arriving for this most unusual circumstance of a president now being treated for coronavirus, multiple days here as a hospital patient expected, inside a facility that has a long 80-year history of treating presidents and military brass and patients of a wide variety, but no one more significant in terms of the government and the continuity and all those other issues you've talked about than a president who is now one of the many Americans who has coronavirus with enough symptoms and enough concern that he's going to get medical treatment here. We've talked about the special suite that's involved inside the Walter Reed facilities, which is certainly a very significant full floor of available square footage for the president, his team, and the White House that'll effectively be operating the government from here in Bethesda, Maryland at this medical and military institution over the next several days. One big question is what happens in terms of the president's care. Is Dr. Sean Conley, who is the White House physician, remaining in charge, or will there be a new attending physician who is a part of the structure here at the hospital? Those are questions we'll have certainly going forward, and we'll have to see how forthcoming the White House and Walter Reed will be in providing that additional information. But there is certainly a very notable patient who's about to be admitted here at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Lester?
You can see the crew has turned off the engines. Marine now lowering the stairs, and we will expect again to see the president step off on his own power and make his way into the hospital. We saw at one point in that side view, I saw a brief shot of the president through the window here, but we are about to see him step off. I don't know if he's going to walk in the hospital or if he will be driven to another door. We'll all wait and find out. Like Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, standing at the doorway. And there's the president. The president lost from our side of this camera there, but it looks like he will be driven to another entrance to the hospital, a full motorcade in place there. But important for Americans and for the world to see the American president on his own 2 feet and seeking precautionary treatment, I think is how it's being put here at the military hospital. Again, the White House has said he has had minor symptoms related to COVID-19 and was receiving some treatment at the White House, but obviously more options, should they be necessary, available here. And this decision, apparently in consultation with the president, doctors decided this was the best course of action, depending on the journey of this particular disease. As we watch this, let me go back to Hallie Jackson. Hallie, what has it been like at the White House through all this?
Surreal, Lester, in a word, and I think that is just the objective experience that I've had as a reporter covering this. The President of the United States, after months of this country being in a pandemic, now becoming one of these 7.3 million people in this country who are fighting or have fought this virus here. There's a lot to look at when you see the president walking down Marine One there. A couple of observations. His White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, as you correctly noted, Lester, was with him wearing what appeared to be an N95 mask, which is considered, of course, sort of the gold standard for healthcare professionals and people who are kind of on the front lines. Earlier today, when we were here at the White House, Meadows was not wearing a mask at all when he was talking with reporters and was asked about that, why he was not wearing one and sort of setting an example here. So it's notable that he's in one, as of course the president is as well. You have to remember, Lester, this is a president who doesn't love to spend time away from his own home as far as overnight trips. Since I've been covering him for the last 4.5, 5 years or so, what we've always noticed is that if he can get home back to his own room at night, that is what his preference would be, unless it's something like a multi-day trip, in which case oftentimes he'll stay at one of his own properties if that's available. So for the president to be now spending multiple nights in the hospital, you have to imagine that that is something that is obviously unusual for him, that is different for him, and that is some of the reporting threads that we're working on here. There's a moment when you look at this, Lester, because when you pull back and put this into some context here, this is, as we have been talking about, this is one of the most serious health crises that a U.S. president has faced in decades, as you've talked about with Michael BESCHLOSS, with John Meacham. And so standing here on the North Lawn and looking up and watching the helicopter take the president of the United States to the hospital where he is sick with the coronavirus, the disease, the virus that has infected millions of people worldwide, killed some 200,000 people here in this country, it is sobering, I think is one word for it. As you take a look now at the chopper from earlier, for people in Washington, there is a sense, a lot of people in Washington, they say it's a town, everybody's connected to politics in some way, right? But it's not often that you would hear the chopper heading over to Walter Reed like that. The flight path here in D.C., as Kelly O'Donnell, our colleague there at Walter Reed, reported, people were driving by honking. Obviously, it is notable that the president is there, and now that the word is out, people are aware. We'll note that the First Lady was not with him. She also, remember, tested positive. Her symptoms, according to the White House physician, are a mild cough and a headache. Also remember that the president and First Lady's son, Barron, is home. His school had been virtual, for example, and so that is obviously potentially a factor here as well. And so there's just a lot of moving pieces at play as we look at what's going to happen over the next few days. There's a question of how long the president will remain at Walter Reed, Lester. I've been talking to sources. Nobody will go beyond just saying a few days. It seems like they want to keep that a little bit fluid, just in case they maybe tack a day on the front end or the back end or whatever. If it does end up being only a few days, Lester, it is likely that the president is still going to have to isolate if he does end up coming back here to the White House after a few days. And that is because of the CDC guidelines when it comes to somebody who has tested positive for coronavirus. For somebody who is showing symptoms of coronavirus, the isolation period is 10 days after the onset of symptoms if they start improving, and 24 hours fever-free. So those are the thresholds, the parameters that likely, if the White House is following CDC guidelines, the president would have to end up following along with the First Lady in order to be sort of out of that isolation period, Lester. We know that Vice President Pence is here in Washington. He is somebody that obviously I think a lot of folks are eager to see as well. It is my understanding, based on a source familiar with the Vice President's travel, that he had not been expected to travel before the debate anyway, which is of course next week in Salt Lake City. But as of today, had still been planning to travel to Salt Lake City, we are told, on Monday and spend time there prior to the vice presidential debate. He also had a slew of travel planned after the debates, hitting some of those battlegrounds, doing some campaigning. The vice president's physician has said that he had not had close contact with the president, and so he himself did not need to quarantine, and the expectation was that his schedule would continue on as planned. Of course, now that the president is at Walter Reed, that is another avenue of reporting that we are working on as well, Lester. So to get back to your initial question, it is history here at the White House, and I think that everybody feels that.
We know the president's a competitor. It feels a little awkward to talk politics right now because his health obviously most important, but he is a competitor. Is there any speculation or talk that he may try to do virtual events during his convalescence?
So we don't know for sure what the president will do, but the campaign hopes to and intends to do virtual events based on a statement from them earlier today. Some events will be postponed, some will be virtual. And you have to remember, Lester, that this is a president and I covered him in 2016 at rally after rally. I've covered him throughout his time in the administration. He loves being on the road. For months I have been hearing from people close to the campaign and close to the White House about how eager the president was to pick up the pace of his on-the-road campaigning to get out of the White House as we get closer and closer to Election Day. We are now 32 days out from Election Day, and rather than being on the road, the president is just the opposite of that. He is isolating. He is in the hospital and then will likely end up returning to the White House if, in fact, it is in that time period.
Hold a second on that, Hallie, because the president has apparently just posted a video of himself. I haven't seen it, but let's look at it.
I want to thank everybody for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out. The First Lady is doing very well. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will never forget it. Thank you.
So, Hallie, a small thing, a video, a small thing of watching somebody board and exit a helicopter, but in the totality, a very, very important message being sent by the president tonight.
And a message that the White House wanted to send, which is that, as we have heard, the president is in charge and the president is still capable of leading this country. There has been a lot of discussion, as you talked about with Pete Williams, our colleague, and others, about what happens if the president were to become incapacitated. And this is clearly a show of force by the White House to say that is not the case. The president may be, obviously, testing positive for coronavirus, but they want to put the optics out there that he is still capable of leading this country. You know, it's interesting listening to the president there, Lester, and I'll have to go back and listen to it again, but there has been some discussion among sources I've been talking to today about his sort of hoarse voice. Some folks around here had said, well, he's been doing a lot of campaign rallies. That could be a part of it, but we know, based on what the doctor has said and what other sources of ours have said, that the president does have a low-grade fever, and he is fighting some fatigue there. And so that video clearly meant to show that the president still can do it, essentially.
Hallie Jackson, thanks. Also standing by for us at the White House is correspondent Peter Alexander. So, Peter, the president will apparently have the ability to work if he wants to in an office area at the hospital. So what's going to be happening at the White House?
Yeah, you know, Lester, just to live in that video for one more moment if we can, I was struck by the president's own words. It lasts only 18 seconds, and it may be the most scrutinized piece of video over the course of the next 72 hours or longer if we don't see the president in the course of that time. The president saying, I think I'm doing very well. And he said of the First Lady that she is doing very well. He was grateful for all the support that he has received. And that's what we will see of him. Notably, it was posted just moments after he was out of camera view at Walter Reed. This was part of a conversation the White House began late last night into this morning as they indicated they wanted to get a video of this kind out. It was brief. The president did, and I've seen him many times, walk to Marine One. He did appear to be walking a little bit more slowly, using both hands when he held the rails as he exited. It's clear that he isn't feeling great. They say it's only minor symptoms right now, but again, as we've been reporting, he does have a low-grade fever as well. I want to share with you what we're hearing from his son. For the first time, a member of the Trump family, outside of the president, is speaking about his diagnosis that he first delivered last night. This comes from Eric Trump, and I think we can put this on the screen if you care to read along. It says, President Trump is a true warrior. He will fight through this with the same strength and conviction that he uses to fight for America each and every day. I ask you to join me in praying for his recovery. I have never been more proud of someone and what they have had to endure. Those are the words of the president's son, Eric Trump, only a matter of minutes ago. So what happens here at the White House? Well, we know that the vice president remains at the Naval Observatory a short distance away, but the president will be still directing things. He'll be running government, proving that he's the one behind the way our government functions going forward. What was on the schedule before his diagnosis early this morning was a series of rallies. Those obviously are off for now. One was supposed to take place outside Orlando tonight. Another one was supposed to take place in Wisconsin. The president, of course, has faced criticism for hosting these rallies that have really had almost no social distancing and very few people wearing masks. But tonight, notably, the president was wearing a mask. He was dressed in a suit the way that he likes to carry himself. And those aides, including Mark Meadows, chief of staff, appear to be wearing those N95s, the sort of best available masks that you can wear, that some of the top medical folks wear as well when they have concerns about potential exposure to the virus. Lester?
Yeah, we will all wonder and wait and see as the president works his way, hopefully, to a speedy recovery, how this will change, how he will talk about COVID and the threat that it continues to pose for so many people here in this country and around the world. Senior Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell following all this with us. What are some of your observations right now, Andrea?
Well, I think one of the reasons for that short video, obviously to reassure the political world, but also foreign adversaries, and to send the message around the world that he's on his feet, that he feels he's doing well, and that this hospitalization does not mean he is in worse shape than the obvious, that he has the positive diagnosis. What was going on behind the scenes immediately with this diagnosis, with this positive test, was that the intelligence community throughout the U.S. government was looking for any signs that adversaries, perhaps China in the South Seas or China in Taiwan or Iran in the Gulf, Iran in Yemen, that any of these bad actors might be doing something to take advantage of a weakened American president during especially that window when we had not seen him on his feet. And at the same time, the military would be doing preparatory plans. It's standard operating procedure. There is a whole continuity of government plan that has been in place. It was revised after 9/11. Congress now also has such a plan for the domestic situation. And it's particularly important now when we already know from the professionals in the intelligence community, although not really affirmed by anyone other than Christopher Wray, the FBI director, not by the other intelligence appointees of the president who resist this, that Vladimir Putin's Russia is already trying actively with misinformation in particular. Unlike 2016, where it was largely a covert hacking operation and also misinformation, this time what they're seeing is real misinformation to try to exploit the schisms in the American political society. We've seen the racial reckoning and all of the other issues right now, the partisanship and the toxic nature of our rhetoric, and to exploit that through social media, through false flags, through doctored videos. And all of that is taking place in the run-up to the election, only 32 days away. So the intelligence community is working overtime just to make sure that nothing else is happening.
And the president sending a very clear message that he is still here. And that video, as you noted, was released. Exactly. We also saw him getting on and off the helicopter and sending a message that will be obviously scrutinized for some time to come. Casey Hunt can tell us more about some of the reaction we're getting to these events. Casey?
Lester, just to pick up exactly where you just left off with Andrea, as I'm talking to sources on Capitol Hill who are, of course, focused on and concerned about continuity of government, as you were talking about, this video I'm finding was, in fact, reassuring. And I think this underscores the broader conversation about why it's so important to have information from public officials when something of this magnitude is going on. There was increasing speculation about just how dire the president's condition may have been as the hours have passed this afternoon, and we have not heard anything from a president who usually is extraordinarily communicative in tweets and other ways. And so there was worry and focus on this on Capitol Hill that I think has been tempered a little bit by both the fact that the president, as we're seeing right now, walked out to Marine One, flashed the thumbs up, and then put out this very brief video where we did hear at least a little bit from him about what's going on here. We do know and can report that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who of course is behind Vice President Pence in the line of presidential succession, was not notified that President Trump was going to be going to Walter Reed. And an aide tells me that she hasn't had any continuity of government conversations with the White House today. There are ongoing and standing policies and procedures that are always in operation, but this is, of course, a rather extraordinary time. We also have not gotten an update, or rather, I should say, we got no comment from Senator Chuck Grassley, who is the president pro tem of the Senate. He is right behind Nancy Pelosi in that line of succession. An aide tells us that they don't typically discuss these continuity of government conversations publicly. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi's, she was asked about it on camera this morning and was willing to go a little bit farther in talking about this. We also have an update, Lester, from Senator Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He says on Twitter just in the last few minutes that he did take a COVID-19 test out of an abundance of caution and that the test came back negative. He says he looks forward to starting Supreme Court hearings on October 12th. That was, of course, the previously announced schedule to hold hearings for Amy Coney Barrett, President Trump's selection for the Supreme Court. That's going to be pretty fast if members of the Judiciary Committee have to quarantine. And remember, Senator Mike Lee of Utah tested positive earlier today and is quarantining. He was at an event in the Rose Garden with President Trump announcing Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. So he was also present at a judiciary hearing later on in the week. And there are now questions about whether others may have been exposed. Senator James Lankford also self-isolating, although we don't have any reports that he has tested positive for coronavirus. But this all raises so many questions and has Democrats insisting that those hearings be delayed and not accelerated in this way. So something to watch in the days ahead. Of course, the president's health and what happens in the next 72 hours, the first focus. Lester.
All right, Casey, thank you. The president in the hospital right now. Let's bring in White House correspondent Kristen Welker. I understand we're hearing from former President Obama. Kristen.
That's right, Lester. And of course, one of the things that makes all of this so remarkable is that we are just 32 days from Election Day. And yet what had been a very divisive campaign has really been put on pause to some extent. And we're seeing that in the fact that former President Obama, former Vice President Joe Biden really extending their thoughts and prayers to President Trump, to the First Lady. Let me read you some of what President Obama said earlier today. This was during a joint fundraising event, virtual event with Kamala Harris, who's, of course, the vice presidential nominee. Obama saying, although we're in the midst of a big political fight and we take this very seriously, we also want to extend our best wishes to the President of the United States. The First Lady, Michelle, and I are hopeful that they and others that have been affected by COVID-19 around the country are getting the care that they need, that they are going to be on the path to a speedy recovery. So that is the tone from former President Obama. It echoes what we heard from Senator Kamala Harris, as well as former Vice President Joe Biden. There are going to be some real-world implications on this campaign, Lester. As we just heard, President Trump suspending his campaign events for now with the hopes that he can do some virtually. Former Vice President Biden taking down his negative campaign ads. And I am told we can expect the vice presidential debate to move forward. So both sides have been preparing for that. There'll be a lot of focus on that. This will undoubtedly be a key focus of that debate as all sides really, to a large extent, hit the pause button, Lester, on what had been a very bitter campaign.
All right, Kristen Welker, thanks. Let's talk now with Joseph Fair, a virologist and epidemiologist and NBC News contributor, also NBC News medical correspondent, Dr. John Torres. Dr. Fair, if I can begin with you, a lot of conversation tonight about how we got it, tracing who was seated where, who was not wearing a mask during the debate, the events that followed. A lot of conventions we have taken to heart, 6 feet exposure. In some of these situations, do we have to kind of throw out the rules and think broader?
Well, I think, in the case of the president, at least, he's actively discouraged people from around him, at least if the reporting is true, that actively discouraged people around him from observing even those most basic of rules. So I don't think that, it's frankly a surprise that he got this. It was just a matter of time. Because even elected officials, no one is immune to catching this virus. But when you come to saying, do we need to think of something broader? I think really if we just adhered to masks when you are in the presence of others or anywhere near them, that in and of itself, that one act could decrease the amount of the cases that we have by, I think some projections include at least half, but maybe even more.
And we're looking at video from one of the recent rallies, and again, large crowds, often not masked, and of course that's going to be a focus of trying to trace this. Let me go to NBC News medical correspondent Dr. John Torres now. John, your thoughts about the president being in a military hospital tonight, and does that suggest anything about prognosis or what the journey of this disease will be, or do you believe it's strictly precaution?
I think it's precautionary for the most part, but I think also the fact that he was asymptomatic, didn't have any symptoms, and within a day started developing symptoms. And we know, especially considering his age, the fact that he does have another risk factor, obesity, that puts him in a high risk category for having complications. And the last thing you want is the President of the United States in the White House starting to have complications, and then you need to do what just happened to get him to Walter Reed. It's better to have them there as a precautionary measure. On top of that, you also have to remember that he is now in isolation, and it's easier to isolate him inside a military hospital like Walter Reed than it is inside the White House, because otherwise other people around him can't do the jobs they need to do because they can't get to that area. So the hospital is set up to take care of him in that isolation way. They're set up to take care of him. If things start going a little more complicated, they have the facilities, they have the people, they have the understanding of how to treat him. So I think number one, it's precautionary, but it's also a smart move to make sure that he's in the place he needs to be in case he needs that kind of treatment, Lester.
And Joseph, I noticed when the president got off the helicopter, we saw his chief of staff with him, perhaps others. Typically, as we've seen during this pandemic, when you go to the hospital, you're kind of on your own. They don't want visitors for obvious reasons because of how contagious this is. Typically, would he be rather isolated in a hospital setting, except for that direct medical care?
Typically, yes, but I imagine since it is the head of state and the chief of state, that his staff are going to be trained and offered PPE to be allowed to communicate with the president. Otherwise, he's going to have to render himself incapacitated, and I don't think he's going to do that. So I think that they are going to be able to communicate with him. I think he will have, quote unquote, special privileges and visitors, as opposed to a person, say, in a regular ICU. He's going to have visitors to be able to continue the job of president.
All right, thank you. Let's turn now to Chuck Todd in Washington. Chuck, we heard Kristen mention ago that the vice presidential debate looks like it's going to be a go. As I mentioned earlier, President Trump is a competitor. It's hard to imagine him standing on the sidelines for long. Do you think he will want to engage, even virtually, and really get this campaign going again?
I think the second he can, he will. And I think absolutely he's not a fan of being able of engaging virtually. He did not love the virtual events that his sort of campaign was forcing him to do there for a while back in June and July when the whole country was in more of a at least a semi-lockdown mode. He prefers the in-person, but look, the sooner he's on the trail and look, we're going to get an idea. I think we all know when the president feels better, my guess is the Twitter feed will start to fill up again. That's number one. And that will probably be our first hint to this. But, look, it's very disruptive to this campaign. I mean, I cannot put it, this is to take essentially 10 days away from the Trump campaign. Right, we are 32. At a minimum, right? We know that this is going to keep him off the trail a minimum of 7 to 10 days, and that is assuming the best prognosis here. Not having him out there that just operationally does hamstring this campaign. And look, I know that the reporting is that this vice presidential debate goes on. The question I have is it going to go on in person? I am, we'll see what happens. But if the president is in the situation he's in, it is really an odd thing for me if we start to see the vice president travel the country. You would think that if they're going to do this debate, and that the better precaution to take would be to keep the vice president, mitigate risk with him, keep him in the residence. Doesn't mean you can't participate in a debate remotely. So I still will be surprised if this thing happens in person. Unless maybe the president is in better shape and is going to be fine. But if he at all starts to have his condition get a little bit worse, I just would be surprised to see the vice president travel so much.
A lot of conversations will be taking place in the days ahead. All right, Chuck, thank you. Kelly O'Donnell is at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. What's the scene there right now?
Well, Lester, now that the president is a patient here, in some ways, the street here almost looks a little like what we have at the North Lawn when reporters are stationed to do their reports about what's happening with the president. Now we're here in Bethesda, where there are passersby who've been gathering, people who came out and were able to see Marine One land here behind us as the president transitioned from being the executive to being the patient. And of course, as you've been discussing, the president retains his powers, but now he's going to be in a different environment with the protections that will be around him, an entire floor with a suite of rooms that provide him not only sleeping quarters and a special kitchen and meeting rooms for his staff and treatment and all of that. Very different than a typical patient would experience. This is a military hospital, so the security is certainly tight, and that is of incredible importance since the White House is the most secured residence anywhere in the world. And here now the president will be spending at least a few days in Bethesda, Maryland. We have seen a greater presence of police in this area. They stopped traffic when the president's helicopter was arriving here. That helicopter has since departed, and it will now be the operations of the military facility protecting the commander-in-chief. Lester?
And do we briefly, do we know, will he have additional staff now kind of take up residence there along with him?
The facilities do allow for that. There are rooms available for it, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of reporting they provide for us about the president's day, what he's doing, and what communications he may still have. Any phone calls, talking with world leaders to reinforce that he is alive and well. Important part of communicating that as he's getting care. Lester?
All right, and we see part of that security entourage there outside the hospital. Again, President Trump has just been taken by Marine One from the White House to nearby Walter Reed National Military Medical Center after testing positive late last night for the COVID-19 virus. Excuse me, and experiencing what are being called mild symptoms. The White House is calling this hospitalization a precaution and says it is expected to last several days. We will, of course, continue to follow this story closely. I'll have more coming up on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Lester Holt in New York. Thank you for being with us, everyone. Good evening.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. We begin with the breaking news, the unprecedented health crisis unfolding at this hour in America's highest office. President Trump, a short time.
NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
If they do